And so here I am in Tonopah, Nevada, where I grew up. It was where I spent my years growing up in school. I remember attending a kindergarten again when my classroom was just over here. All the elementary school, 1 through 6, began here. Then 7th and 8th grade was in this building for my junior high. In high school, I spent here. I remember distinctively there was a telephone pole. One of my favorite pastimes in kindergarten was to play marbles. And I had friends, and we played marbles down here next to this telephone pole. Then a big lightning storm came and just exploded the telephone pole next to me. I just remember that as being here, even though I haven't been to Tonopah for more than 10 years. I remember in high school, one of my teachers for American history, Miss Glass, she was a Jewish woman. She felt that we students would have a better appreciation of our American history if we knew how our own forefathers participated in the development of this country. So along with learning about our founding fathers, we also had to pick an ancestor that we could do an oral and a written presentation. She went around the class and handed out sheets of paper to us that we learned were pedigree charts that we had to fill in. And so this began my quest to learn a little bit more about my family history, and I knew I needed to get my dad to help me understand more about that. So I was determined to go home and ask for his help on this assignment. I'm here where I grew up and was raised. This is where Heavenly Father found me in my home. I brought my homework assignment from school here, and I waited for my father to come home. And when he did, I went up to my dad and said, "Dad, I have this school assignment where I need to have an ancestor and write a report on. And I need this ancestor to be someone who has made a difference in American history." And he gave me the names of 3 ancestors that he thought that I could work on that were in my family lines. We have a family member who worked on the Kitty Hawk. We had a family member who was Jonathan Swift of Gulliver's Travels. And then he mentioned this name of Joseph Smith, who was an ambiguous name that I never heard of before, and I asked him who he was. And he said, well, he's the founder of the Mormon Church. That didn't mean anything to me. Who are the Mormons? He says, well, those are the people that discovered the state of Utah. Well, that was American history. And so I said, I'll take him. And he left the room and went into his bedroom, and he pulled out this box. It contained artifacts that had been handed down from one generation to the next since Emma. And so I was excited. I took the contents out, and I was putting them all on the coffee table. And as I did so, the doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. And these are the 2 well-dressed gentlemen at the door who indicated that they represented the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I noticed that they both had the same first name of Elder. I brought them into my home and yelled for my dad to come. And while we were waiting for him to come into the room, the missionaries looked on the coffee table we were standing in front of, and they noticed the Bible, pictures of Emma and Lucy they recognized, the journals and the other artifacts, and they asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm writing a report on some guy named Joseph Smith who started the Mormon Church. Well, there was so much enthusiasm that came from them. They gave me all 6 discussions in the next 10 minutes before my dad came. They were just really excited. I had learned later that these missionaries, they were just recently assigned the area, coming down from Fallon, Nevada. We learned many years later a zone conference was held here in Tonopah. Tonopah's halfway between Las Vegas and Reno, and some missionaries asked this question of what would the mission be like in the smaller towns. And so they set up an experiment to send a pair of missionaries to Tonopah for 6 weeks and determine what kind of opportunities there would be for teaching anyone the gospel here. And so they just came to cold knocking on doors, going from home to home. They came to our home, and then they noticed in the middle of the Nevada desert, somebody has a picture of Emma Smith and Lucy Mack, and wanting to know what was happening, and if we were even members of the church. And I had no knowledge of the church. I have never been raised in the church. I never even heard the name Mormon. The term LDS to me was just an acronym that I heard that had a reference to LSD. So I never knew of them, and my dad was the first that I've ever heard of the name Joseph Smith. And these were just very excited missionaries. And my dad came into the room at that point, and he explained that he was the second great-grandson of the prophet Joseph Smith. And so that would make me the third great-grandson of the prophet Joseph. And that I was working on a school assignment and doing this report. And the missionaries came up with this great idea that they thought that they would help me with my homework assignment by coming by on a regular basis and giving me these discussions. And my dad accepted. I remember right here in my bedroom, as the missionaries were leaving, I went into my bedroom to continue my homework assignment, and grabbing a paper and pen, I could hear on the steps as the missionaries were going down the steps, this is why. This is why Heavenly Father brought us here. We're going to get this family. I remember being in the bedroom. Been there, done that, know where this is going to go. So they came back in the time they said they would. They gave me the discussion and realized, okay, this is not just historical, it's very religious. And they told me about Joseph Smith and the first vision. A week later, they came by again and talking about the importance of baptism, making covenants. And so I decided I didn't want to participate in this. I had a bad experience with another religion a year earlier. And so the next several times the missionaries came by, I ditched the lessons and never attended. We have a garage in our home here where I went to work in the darkroom. So every time I saw the missionaries come or they were coming, I said I had to leave in order to help my dad with his photography work. And what I didn't know was on the other side of town, the missionaries were having another discussion to the Dodge family. And in that home was a girl named Darcy Dodge. She was taking the discussions. She was a Golden. And they happened to mention to her if they knew this boy named Michael Kennedy. And she said she did, and he says, well, he keeps ditching on the missioning lessons. Is there anything you can do to help us? And so she's a really good-looking girl, and she came on over and trying to encourage me to listen to the gospel. And so I was very interested to take those lessons, and I started going to the church on a regular basis, but I didn't have a real testimony of it. The missionaries came back after the end of all the discussions and challenged me to be baptized. And I agreed, but not because I had a testimony or believed everything they were saying. It felt true, and logically it was true, but I didn't have a solid testimony of it. So I only agreed to be baptized because I knew that once I was being baptized, they would go their way and I would go my way, and life would go on. and everybody would be happy. After I agreed to be baptized, I was asked the question as to where do you want to be baptized? And I remember witnessing a few baptized in the Stake Center up in Fallon and in some of the creeks and the rivers, and that was pretty cold. So I wanted to go to a place that was warm, so I thought of Darrow's Hot Springs, which is about 60 miles outside of Tonopah. And this is the Darrow's where I was baptized. The missionaries came out here to baptize me. The entire branch that we were in came out. Darcy, who was my girlfriend at the time, came all the way down from Ricks College, Idaho, with her girlfriend and came down to visit with us here. And this ended up being a full, large party for the day. We even brought gunny sacks, filled them full of hot dogs, and put them in the hot springs that are just over here, the little geyser that's boiling out of the water. It was my father was here, my mother, and all of my brothers were witnesses to this baptism. And I remember coming out of the baptism waters, coming up these steps right here, my dad greeting me here. Dripping wet, giving me a big hug and telling me how proud he was of me. Even though he didn't join the church, he told me of all the religions he would join, this would be the correct one.
I was just thinking about when Jim Butler came here, what in the world made him stop here to start looking for gold?
Silver. He was looking for.
Oh, that's true. It was silver.
He was silver. These are all silver mines that's here. What I'm thinking about is I can see my dad bringing my mother to Cedar City to meet his mom and say, this is my new bride. Then he takes the job to come here, and they're going to start their life here. And I can't imagine where mom's coming over the ridge over there to come into the valley here where Tonopah is.
And before she gets here, she cannot see that there is a town. All you see.
Just desert.
Yeah.
Just sagebrush and desert. She comes into here and she sees all of this and says, what have I got myself into?
And she's coming from where?
Alabama. She lives in Alabama. She grows up in Panama. She's used to all the green and the lush and the tropics. And then this desert.
What have I got myself into, right?
No grass. You see any grass anywhere?
No. Well, I know that there were ones that had grass, but the grass was very expensive. They just had a patch of it. It was like $500 a month to water it, and that was way back in the 70s. So.
All the green out there is sagebrush. Snakes, lizards, hot sun and wind.
And chipmunks. We had lots of chipmunks. You hear that?
What's that?
It's 12 noon.
That was also the siren they ran when they were launching the nuclear warhead.
Really?
So every time they pulled the trigger on it, that was the signal to go to your China cabinets and hold everything before it detonated. And then within a minute after that, you would feel the ground rumble underneath you and you'd hear the big boom.
That must have been freaky.
You got used to it.